Okay, so it runs marvelous. And after I was done with that moronic laughing, oh my goodness. Anyway, so I've got the truck outside today because it's the last sunny day of the year. I'm sure it's late September and it's hot here today. I've got to get the last bits of this stuff painted. So as you can see, I have basically the front fenders, the pickup cab, door tops, and a couple of other little bits yet to do. So if I can just get these painted in the next hour, I gave myself 2 hours today, an hour of prep and an hour of painting, because I got to get back to work. But anyway, that'll be great, because then I can get rid of this bloody awful plastic paint booth tent that's been in here for 6 months, and I can tidy up my shop and get back to some real work and start actually bolting this truck together to get it running. Anyway, let's get some green on here. See ya. I didn't mean to turn this into a painting tutorial, but I realize I haven't talked about, painting at all. All the gray you see on here is primer, obviously. I've done very minimum body work, hammered out a few of the worst dents. I have sort of a acceptable 1/16 of an inch of filler allowance that I don't mind putting it in, because especially the flat panels on aluminum Land Rovers, it's very hard to get them flat again. So if you get them really close, you can just fair them out with just a little bit of filler, and I don't feel too bad about that. The primer I'm using has to be an etch primer, either over aluminum or over galvanizing, which of course a lot of my truck is. This is the one I use. It's a Marhide self-etching primer. I don't know if it's the best, but it hasn't failed me. I've used quite a bit of it over the years. It's crazy expensive. You probably use 6 or so cans doing a truck this size at about $20 a can, so that kind of hurts. But anyway, it is absolutely required, because if you try to paint straight over raw aluminum, you're going to be in trouble, because it will peel right back off again. Likewise with galvanizing. Okay, I've just set up the shop a little bit. I dampen the floor with one of these garden sprayers just before I get going to how about that? No pressure left. Anyway, to just keep the dust down a little bit. When you're doing that, be very careful you don't actually spray water on any of the parts you're planning to paint, because that would definitely affect the adhesion. Okay, paint. So the paint I'm using is Nason. It's a division of DuPont, and it's a single stage urethane paint. I really like urethane paint. I find it flows out really, really nicely, and I've been very happy with this. It's the only second time I've used it, but really, really very happy with it. So it's a paint catalyst thinner, and I use one of these little sticks that comes from Nason, which is really nice. Basically, it automatically does your parts in 8:1:2, which is the ratio I'm doing. So you fill it up to, say, 5 of paint, fill it up to 5 with the catalyst, and up to 5 again with the reducer, and you're all set. I'm going to use this quart can, mix it up, and then filter it into my HVLP gun. This is a new gun for me. I used to use just a regular gun, not an HVLP gun, and it's just a house brand from a local auto parts store here, Napa, but I really like it. I just like the gun. Mix them in the gun. Basically, I like to mount the gun in a vise while I'm filtering the paint in. So I mixed up a quart, and I put about half of it in the gun to get started. That'll probably be more paint than I need for today, but so far I've used less than half a gallon of paint on this truck, so that's something to say about HVLP guns. They do not waste much paint. Anyway, let's go on into the paint booth, put the respirator on, and start to shoot some paint. I probably won't shoot any video of this because I'm worried about getting paint all over the camera, but you've seen paint before. You'll see it when it's green. See ya.
Now I tell you, this is something I wish I had years ago, a parts washer. I think of the countless hours I sat squatting on the floor over a bucket of solvent trying to clean parts up. I don't know. And a blast booth is always handy. This is a pretty cheap one. And it works on a siphon tube, which I've modified somewhat, I'll talk about someday. But it does work. And if you have enough light inside and you can see what you're doing, you can actually blast stuff. And it keeps most of the dust out of all over the place, really. Alright. Good enough. See what that looks like. Not too bad. Cleaned up fairly well. I'll throw it in the acid just to make sure that any last little traces, anything on it. And I'll show you what this is for in a minute. Well, some of you may recognize this as a Scout 2 power steering box. In fact, you may even recognize it from a video I did where I first installed it in my Land Rover when it still had the 2 1/4 in it. Well, there's a bit of a flaw in engineering, and that's to do with the steering arm. And I'll go into that a little more in a minute, as soon as I can get this one off. Beauty. Okay, so the bottom line, I don't know if you're still watching, is that this steering arm I used was actually off a Chevy S10 pickup truck. The reason I used this one is because I calculated that the total sweep was correct for the total sweep of the tie rod on the Land Rover. However, what it ended up being was way too slow and had many, many more turns than required. So what I need is a slightly longer arm. The slightly longer arm is this one. It's only slightly longer, but I'm hoping it'll make the difference. And what this arm is off a Disco 1. Same spline. Pretty cool, eh? What it isn't is the same amount of drop. It's about 3/4 or maybe even an inch of less drop, but I don't think that's going to give me too much trouble, but I'll wait till I put it on the truck and try it. Anyway, let me bolt this up and put it on the truck. Okay, so I like that. With the Disco 1 arm on and the gear in place and everything set up, it's exactly 3 and about 1/10 of a turn, just slightly over 3 turns lock to lock, which is great because that Blazer, which I drive every day, is 3 turns lock to lock, so I know I'm in the right ballpark. That seems really, really great. What I'm tempted to do now is put the old arm back on, the S10 arm, and see how many turns that was, because I think it was about 75. It was pretty weird to drive. Anyway, one thing I've just noticed, I'm quite used to jacking up the front of my truck on the front diff, and with only one leaf and airbags, I have some drastically improved articulation. I had to jack this thing way up in the air to get this wheel off the ground. That's kind of cool. Anyway, so I'm going to tighten this up and bolt it all up, and I'll talk to you in a minute. Doing proper science here. I put the S10 back arm, and it is just over 4 1/4 turns lock to lock. So maybe it's not a couple of thousand, but I think it's going to be a big difference. 4.5 versus 3. The thing, of course, about using the Disco 1 steering arm, of course, is because it's the same spline as the Scout 2 box, it's just a bolt-on, and because it's the same taper as any Land Rover tie rod end, it's a bolt-on. So really, all you gotta do is find one and it fits perfectly. Now I say perfectly. This was a hot tip. He said, Peter, you gotta try this, it's a great trick. I'm finding the spline a little tight. It's the same tooth count. It seems to be the same taper, but it's just a little tight. I haven't really whaled it on there yet because I want to be able to get that arm off again at least one more time. So I'm not vouching that it is the same spline. I'm going to do a little bit more research. It's certainly very, very close. Anyway, that's about it for today. See ya.